Thank you so much. Let me just ask, do you think the tea coil is working? Thank you. So, welcome for coming to tonight's program. My name is Liz Schultz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Oberlin Heritage Center. We are a local historical society here in town. If this is your first program with us, we are, as I said, local historical society. We're separate from the college and separate from the city, so I hope you can pick up some information about us. And because we are separate, members are very much appreciated if you want to pick up a membership form as well. Our mission is to preserve and share Oberlin's unique heritage and to make our community a better place to live, learn, work, and visit. Thank you very much to the Oberlin Public Library for allowing us to use the community room and providing tonight's beverages. We also appreciated working with the ARB to provide tonight's food, and they gave us a discount, so thank you to the ARB. We would appreciate hearing your feedback about tonight's programs. So there may have been an evaluation form on your chair. If you didn't get one, they're on the table in the back too. So at the end of the program, please write down your comments. We read every single evaluation and take those comments into consideration when planning our projects and our future programs. Just a few events coming up on our calendar, in case you're not on our newsletter, but you can sign up for it. On March 14th, we have a program that will be at Kendall at Oberlin, but it's open to the public, and that is about, it's called the Fifth Star. It's about Ohio's contributions to women's suffrage movement. So that is March 14th. On March 8th, like many other organizations, we're having an Eclipse event here in town, right at Mill on Main, which used to be Campbell's Antiques. April, thank you very much. I just gave you the wrong date for the eclipse. Okay. April 8th, the eclipse. So April 10th is our annual meeting, and then April 30th, back here at the library, we will have a program about Linz Jones, who was an ornithologist who taught at Oberlin College and really started some events that ornithologists around the nation and the world use, like the big counts. So should be an interesting program to hear about Oberlin's relationship to that. But you are here for tonight's program. Amanda Manahan is the Museum, Education, and Tour Manager at the Oberlin Heritage Center. She has worked in this capacity from 2015 to 2022, and then took a pause, and she came back to us last year in 2023. She earned a bachelor's degree in anthropology with minors in history and music from Heidelberg University, and then a master's in history museum studies from the Cooperstown graduate program. We are excited to have you all here tonight and thank the many individuals who reached out in advance of this program. Every time the Heritage Center offers this program, we get more suggestions for new leads, people to include, businesses to include, which is really wonderful. And it's really that active memory that is more important than the reports and the books. It's people, all of us talking about these memories. We do hope you'll hear something new tonight, as well as maybe reminisce about some things from memory lane. And with that, please help me welcome Amanda to the podium.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. We are going to be recording this program and hope to upload it to YouTube in the next few days. I'm just curious though, raise your hand if you are a current business owner. Raise them high. Be proud. Be proud. All right. Thank you everyone for coming out. All right, so this program will focus on stories of African Americans who came to Oberlin for one reason or another. They settled here, they forged livelihoods and businesses for themselves and for their families. The first version of this program actually dates back to November of 2016, and then modified versions arose every couple of years. And it was really because of the information given to us during those programs and following those programs. This presentation does not include a comprehensive list of all the individuals who have created jobs or products or had their own businesses, but we're really trying to capture these stories. Nor does it include people who we might call laborers, who were self-employed. But again, we want to collect those stories too. So this program keeps expanding and evolving thanks to the information shared by community members and family members, especially of past business owners. So we'll be highlighting those contributions tonight. And even now, years after we started this research, new people and businesses, again, are being brought to our attention all the time. To continue this learning and preserving of Oberlin's unique heritage, we have a lot of time at the end of the program for anyone who would like to share. Hearing your memories, as Liz said, is what fills in for us the missing records, the written record, as many businesses do not advertise in the ways that are currently reflected in our archives and collections. And also people operated, maybe not in a brick and mortar downtown building, but through their homes. And we want to make sure that those stories are being represented. So I will be moving through the businesses tonight fairly chronologically, although at times there will be some common threads, family connections, which are better shared together. So this evening, I do want to focus more on stories from the 20th century, but also recognize that there are standout people from the 19th century who deserve some mention first. Business owners are seen as leaders within their communities, from offering employment and economic opportunities to providing space to converse to being civically engaged individuals. The same was true back in the 1800s, as seen with the case of the Oberlin Wellington rescuers. Several of the Black Oberlinians who were arrested for participating in the rescue of freedom seeker John Price were also business owners. For example, John Watson, he and his wife Margaret, they were formerly enslaved in Virginia, and they came to Oberlin for educational opportunities for themselves and for their children. They arrived around 1840. Once they were here, John finally learned how to read and write in his 30s. He worked as a drayer, which is a person who operated and pulled carts with heavy loads on them. But Watson found this to be too physically demanding, too taxing on his aging body. So he instead opened a confectionery store and then later owned an entire building on South Main Street, which was known as the Commercial Block. In this building, he had his own grocery store, an ice cream parlor, a restaurant, and they had an ice house in the rear. The structure, unfortunately, burned down in the May 2nd, 1886 fire, but the area where the grocery store used to be is approximately where Ada's Place once was, at 16 South Main Street, and is present day All Things Great. In the 1858 Oberlin Wellington rescue, Watson was actually the first Oberlinian to arrive on the scene in Wellington. He and his son William were arrested along with 35 other men for breaking the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. Along with several others, John spent 83 days in the Cuyahoga County Jail before the charges were dropped and the rescuers were released. Following the Civil War, John continued serving the community and seeking out ways in which to improve the lives and rights of Black citizens. He presided at state conventions of Black men in Columbus, and in 1871, he was chosen to replace John Mercer Langston on the Oberlin School Board when Langston left for DC. John Watson, unfortunately, likely died of a heart attack in his store in 1872 after working in the ice house. He was about 52 years old. His obituary in the Lorraine County News detailed his life as an active member of the community, and it included a letter to the editor by a wholesale grocer based in Cleveland, stating that he was, quote, a businessman of strict integrity and prompt in meeting his obligations. In his demise, we think the world has one honest man less. Brothers Henry and Wilson Bruce Evans grew up in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and learned the trade of cabinet making there. With their wives, Henrietta and Sarah Jane Leary, the brothers made their way north to find a new home in 1854. After several months of traveling and a brief stay in Cincinnati, they arrived in Oberlin and soon established a shop on East Mill Street, which is present-day Vine Street. Within a couple of years, the brothers purchased a building known as Walton Hall, which was a two-story frame building that originally served as a men's dormitory. They moved the building to their property on Mill Street and converted it into their shop. But unfortunately, just a few years later, that was destroyed by fire as well. Both brothers were arrested for their participation in the Oberlin Wellington Rescue. From jail, the rescuers printed one edition of a newspaper they called The Rescuer, very original, and which included advertisements from several of the men, including this one, I love this one, stating, quote, Henry Evans and brother, late of Oberlin, Ohio, have removed to the shed one door west of J. Scott's Saddle and Harness Shop, and we'll talk about Scott in a moment here. All persons who would secure a visit from, quote, tired nature's sweet restore, balmy sleep, will please call and examine his work. You can rest on his beds, if you can rest anywhere. Government officials need not apply. Working in a mill or a shop with powered equipment is very dangerous work, and Henry, unfortunately, was not spared from these dangers. In 1861, he was badly injured when an iron wrench fell upon the planer he was operating. The machine was unforgiving, and the wrench was flung back at him, striking him in the face, crushing the bones of his nose, and possibly leading to the loss of his eye. The community supported Henry and his family during the trying time, providing assistance while he was out of work. Unfortunately, Henry would succumb to another accident 25 years later. Wilson, after having served in the American Civil War, operated an undertaking business along with his carpentry and cabinet work. By 1890, Wilson's health and age started to catch up with him, so he applied for and was granted a pension by the government. He died in 1898. Descendants continued to own and live in the house for several decades, eventually passing it on to Dorothy and Borden Miller, who sought to get historic designation for the home. Today, the home is actively being restored by the Evans Home Historical Society, and they just dedicated a new historical marker this past week, and so congratulations to the Evans. Moving along Vine Street, there was the Scott family. John and Cecilia Scott were also born in North Carolina. As a child and a young man, John was bound as an apprentice to Matthew Nathaniel Leary, who was actually the father of the previously mentioned Henrietta and Sarah Jane Leary, as well as their brother Louis Sheridan Leary, who died in the Harper's Raid, on the Harper's Ferry Raid. The Scott family arrived in Oberlin in 1856, and John set up a harness shop also in Walton Hall with the Evans brothers. John also enlisted in the Civil War, which interrupted his business endeavors, but following his service, he came back to Oberlin and picked up where he left off. However, he expanded his business into also trunk making. He also had a business temporarily in Kipton. He moved down to Tennessee for a few years and had a business there, trying to escape the Ohio winters. But due to poor conditions down there and even poorer treatments of African Americans in the state, Scott returned to Oberlin, and he expanded his business once more by adding a furniture store and also an undertaking business. Scott's business history was easier to track down than most due to the prevalence of his ads in local publications. From newspapers to city directories to college publications, his ads were everywhere. And just these 3 ads alone were separately included in the 1873 to 74 Oberlin City Directory. For OSB Wall and David Watson, not much has been written about their business endeavor, but something that I wanted to point out is that these 2 men of the Oberlin Wellington Rescue went into partnership. They had a business together on East College Street making shoes and boots. It was a fairly short-lived business, and while there's little recorded about this partnership in business, Watson, who is of no relation to the previously mentioned John Watson, went into farming by the 1860s, and OSB Wall served in the Civil War and then moved to Washington, D.C., where he was quite politically engaged during Reconstruction, and that deserves a whole other program of its own. Moving away from the Oberlin Lions and Rescuers, we'll next explore the businesses of the Burnett family. Cornelius and Caroline Burnett came to Oberlin, also from North Carolina. Cornelius arrived first in Oberlin in 1860, and he purchased a lot on the east side of Main Street. He was inspired by the town's commitment to education and opportunities, so he wanted to move his family here for those opportunities. However, the family's plans were derailed when the Civil War broke out in 1861, and it delayed their arrival until after the war in 1865. The Burnetts erected a two-story building at the front of their lot, which is kind of where Black River is today, at 15 South Main Street. The building would serve as a barbershop for Cornelius, and then Caroline operated a restaurant and boarding house. The family lived behind the building in a frame structure. Unfortunately, this brick building and their shop, the restaurant, they suffered from the fire of 1882. The building that came out of the fire, after the fire, built in 1886 by John D. Carpenter, includes some of those original building elements. Cornelius and his wife were well respected and involved members of the community. Both were greatly involved in local churches. Cornelius also held membership in the Masonic Order. He continued his occupation in Oberlin until he had to retire in 1891 due to poor health. He died in 1896 and is buried in Westwood Cemetery. Caroline, however, moved to Buffalo, New York with her daughter, Mary Burnett Talbert, who served 4 years as the president of the National Association of Colored Women's Club, was a vice president of the NAACP, and a founder of the Niagara Movement. In 2021, a marker was placed in honor of Mary Burnett Talbert and her accomplishments near where she grew up. Henry Lee ran a livery stable that kept horses and wagons available for town visitors, and this was located behind where the hotel stands today on East College Street. Known as somewhat of a contentious man, but a skilled orator, Lee was committed to defending his rights as well as racial justice. Lee was often cited in local newspapers for his editorials, or also editorials about him and his lawsuits and his fights for racial equality. But even in his advertisements, like what you see here, he is defending his character and his business while also calling out the racial disparities faced by Black citizens. In addition to his livery stable, where he rented out horses and operated an omnibus, which is basically just this large carriage pulled by horses, he also owned a skating rink, which is at the corner of East College and South Water, which is now Park Street. The rink had electric lights and band music, and this place was known as the Constellation Skatorial Tobogganarial Park. Like the name. Just came across this very recently. Lee was also a very industrious man, evidenced by his numerous business ventures, but he was also dedicated to, I guess you could say, efficiency. He even obtained a patent for an improvement to a form of animal trap. Can I say what I call it, Liz?
Sure.
I call it the Rat Juicer 3000. But it's a very kind of ingenious application, and I do have the copy of the full patent up here if you'd like to see it. Lee is another man who deserves a whole program just about him. Lee's livery business proved to be one of his most successful and long-standing operations, but unfortunately he created a pretty terrible enemy in a man with a penchant for fire, who burned down his livery in 1898. It destroyed most of his vehicles, it killed 14 horses, it was devastating to Lee. This disaster was marked with one of the earliest sketches of an Oberlin story to appear in the local newspapers. Lee passed away the following year. The Gators, they set up an ice skating rink as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. It was on East Lorraine Street across from their home at 111 East Lorraine Street. It's where the present-day North Shore Manor Apartments are located. Thomas Gators started the rink in the 1890s, and his son Walter took it on in the 1920s. Thomas worked as a teamster throughout his adult life. He delivered milk, as he is doing so in this picture from 1930 during their spring flood, so a very dedicated delivery man. He was also a contractor, a mason worker, and in the business of excavating and grading. So for the ice rink, in order to prepare it, the family would flood the field with water and wait for it to freeze. When it did, they would invite the whole community to come out and skate, and they'd only charge 10 cents for an entire day of skating. In 1895, the Oberlin News reported that the Gators sold 600 tickets in one day alone. And that far surpassed their competition, Lee's skating rink. The most popular days were when the band played, which often included both Thomas and Walter in the band. After Thomas Gator's death in 1924, Walter took over, but running the skating rink proved to be very costly, both in time and money. Walter struggled with the weather each year to get good skating conditions, and the park was only open sporadically. From our oral history collection, there was an interview with Patty Stetson by Lisa Goodman in 1984, and she revealed the following. It was halfway, the skating rink, between Park and Pleasant Street on East Lorraine, and it was originally owned by the Gators family, but it was costly because of all the water used. It was a huge, big outdoor rink. They owned the land and prepared it and flooded it, and the only time they could open was when it was cold enough to freeze the ice, and we paid 10 cents to go all day long. There was a big pot-bellied stove inside the little warming room, and when you got too cold or your mittens got soaked, you just hung things on the stove. Sometimes they started on fire, but it didn't seem to bother anybody. When we wanted to resurface the ice at Gators, Mr. Gators had 6 snow shovels, and he would just turn on the hose and give us each a snow shovel, whoever happened to be there. And we would skate up and down with a snow shovel to smooth out the rough spots and spread the water around. On Saturdays and Sundays, they had live band music and the windows were open. They were all in the warming room in order to get the sound out onto the ice. But we always knew whether or not there was skating because there was a little sign on the Oberlin Savings Bank corner that would say, "Skating today." So you would know whether or not it was cold enough. Some years, there was no skating at all. The winter never was cold enough. They weren't able to freeze the ice fast enough to skate. And that's when Mr. Gators had such a terrible time making ends meet. In 1928, the city stepped in to help keep the rink going, with Walter acting as superintendent, and they made this whole thing kind of this cooperative venture. Still, the rink never seemed to make a profit, and with Walter aging, the rink closed officially in 1951. Walter continued, however, playing in various bands, typically on his cornet or drums. His son Thomas, named after Walter's father, continued the musical spirit of his father and grandfather, playing in bands, including during his time in the Navy. After his death, he bequeathed a couple of trumpets, photos, and items relating to his family businesses to the Oberlin Heritage Center, and I brought a few of those items with me today. Marie de France, she was born in New Orleans in 1874 and moved to Oberlin, where she attended the public schools and then studied 1 year at the College Conservatory of Music. In the early 1890s, Marie went to work in Belle Knowlton's millinery shop at 31 West College Street, and by 1896, she bought up her stock to open her own millinery shop at 32 East College Street. In 1904, she moved to a storefront on South Main Street, one that she would occupy until her death in 1926. Her shop was marked with a large hanging triangle sign with the words, "Millinery M. de France." She was known as a gracious woman, and that she would take in prospective milliners to train them in the art of hat making and selling. Her successful business lasted for 35 years. Oberlin resident Marva Fields remembered DeFrance in her 1979 oral history, and she stated, quote, "DeFrance made the hats and displayed them in the window just to tempt people to want. If she were here now, she would wonder why we don't wear hats. And maybe if she were here to make them, we would wear more." DeFrance knew how to convince buyers, and her ads often graced the local papers, including these from 1901, and I think there's another one from 1900. The one that I like is, "There are no articles of wear which taste, there are no articles of wear which taste so necessary in all things else, so much will bear as ladies' millinery. This taste we have, we ask your trade, will do the best we can to suit the mistress or the maid. The price will suit the man." Annie Mason, with her husband Julius, who was an iceman, had his own business. She operated Mason's Tea Room in a house on 52 South Main Street from 1927 to 1940. They also had a daughter named Destiny. This business was exceptionally successful, and the atmosphere of the tea room was, quote, "swanky," according to some Oberlin residents. The building used to stand where Carpenter Court entrance is now. Adora Gadet remembered in her 1988 oral history, quote, "In Mason's tea room, she had the best food. It was homemade, it was home cooking. She had good food there, and lots of people ate there. Used to get what they call meal tickets, where you would pay a week ahead, and then you would just go, and when you want to eat, they punch your ticket, and you'd pay $10 a week." So she really catered to the student crowd. Next we have Gerald Scotty, Gerald Scott, who went by Scotty. After the integrated Cosmopolitan Barbershop opened, Gerald Scott happened to be looking for a new place to settle down. While walking through downtown Oberlin one day, he was already kind of enamored with the community, and he saw this "Barber Wanted" sign in a window, and he immediately applied. Scott had previously been working as a barber in Worcester, and Robert Taliaferro hired him to take over the shop's second chair, and eventually everybody came to know him as Scotty. After 4 years, Scotty bought the Cosmopolitan Barbershop and agreed to keep it an integrated shop. Scotty also worked alongside his brother, Charles, for a period during the 1940s. Scotty was eventually joined in town by George Goodson and Ray Murphy, who wanted to make careers as barbers in integrated Oberlin shops. Murphy and Goodson ran George and Ray's barbershop simultaneously when Scotty was running his shop. Then George Goodman and Scotty, they opened up a shop on West College Street called the Queue Cue, which is a kind of pun on the fact that you could get a haircut and also play a game of pool all at the same time, or same roof, not the same time. That would be interesting. According to barber Manuel Espinoza in his 2014 oral history, he said the following about his business as well as George Goodson's, quote, "Well, when I came to Oberlin, the flat top and all that stuff was really going out. The long hair was coming in. We were talking to George Goodson, and I asked him, why did you close up? Because he had a nice business going. And he says, I got tired of these people asking for those newfangled haircuts." The September 12, 1969 Oberlin Reviews listed the closing of the Q&Q. Whether or not what George said was actually the reason that he got out of the business, one thing was clear: he was not done, and his entrepreneurial spirit would go on to create new businesses in Oberlin. We're going to kind of sidestep that for just a moment and talk about Ruth. Ruth Goodson, George's wife, had her own business simultaneously when her husband was barbering. She was making and selling a variety of headpieces and specialty items such as bridal veils, hats, and tiaras. Ruth was also working as a dental technician in Cleveland and worked in the sewing department at the town shop in Ben Franklin. In 1970, Ruth and George opened Goodson's Tropical Fish Store, adjacent to their home at 76 East College Street. George said he was inspired to start this business after visiting an aunt in Cleveland in December 1969, and he ended up coming home with a 20-gallon fish tank that she wasn't using anymore. Within a couple of years, the Goodsons prided themselves on cultivating over 120 species of tropical fish. They sold from anywhere from $1 to $3 per fish. The shop was open 6 days a week from noon until 8 p.m., with Ruth taking on the earlier hours until George returned home from work. Being open for so many days and needing to take care of the fish, the Goodson children were also in the family business. Georgelle and Jerome often helped fill in at the store while their dad was at work, and Georgelle can be seen here in both images, and a big thank you to her for sending these images and sharing information about our family's businesses. I also love how in both images about the tropical fish store, there are cats. Both Ruth and George had artistic and creative abilities. As previously mentioned, Ruth was talented in hat making and sewing, but she also enjoyed traveling, doing stained glass, baking, shopping, fishing, just spending time with her family. George was self-taught in many things, including woodworking and poetry. The two combined their skills and their passions, and additionally, at the same time, opened up the Craft Cruise store, which also started out of their home, but then they moved to a shop in downtown. All right, Gigi. So when Gigi Jones graduated from Oberlin High School, she was interested in becoming an interior decorator or a fashion designer. But as she began looking for a career, she decided to become a lady barber. She went this route instead of what we might call a hairdresser because she stated that, quote, women are more finicky than men about their hair usually. She attended the Western Kentucky Training School in Paducah, Kentucky, where she was the only woman in a class of 30, and she graduated second in her class. Gigi opened shop in Elyria in 1962. When interviewed by the Chronicle Telegram in 1969, Gigi talked about her motivation, stating, quote, I think of heads, not dollars. On certain days, there are special prices for youngsters. I know how rough it is to have a large family and how expensive all those haircuts can be. So I'd like to help. After all, life is short. You might as well help people while you're here. You can't when you're gone. Gigi then opened a shop in Oberlin in 1975, and her first shop was in a building owned by the Clark brothers, but that has been demolished to make way for McDonald's. She moved her operation then to a house across from Mount Zion Baptist Church of Oberlin, and she continued to work there until her retirement in 2005. Known for her sense of humor, determination, and outgoing nature, Gigi kept up much business and connections through the community and was considered a friend by many. Lily Faye Taylor and Beulah Mae Williams are two of several women who owned and managed beauty salons in Oberlin. We'll start with Taylor. She grew up in Arkansas and attended the all-black cosmetology school called Hollywood Beauty College in Hot Springs, Arkansas. She graduated in 1955. A couple years later, in 1957, she moved to Northern Ohio, and after settling in Oberlin, she began working as a cook for the college. Faye eventually renewed her license and got back into the beautician business, opening a shop in her home basement at 180 North Park Street, while she was also still working for the college. Lily was greatly involved in her community at Mount Zion Baptist Church and was a founding member of the Oberlin Club of the National Association of Negro Businesses and Professional Women's Clubs. Even into her 80s, she was still cutting hair and offered her services to local funeral homes. Beulah Mae Williams was born in McRoberts, Kentucky, and moved to Oberlin in the 1950s. She received her degree from Wilkins School of Cosmetology in 1964, a program which was established to promote Black entrepreneurship during and following the Great Migration. The school was located on East 46th Street in Cleveland, and Beulah remembered riding to the school, which was in the Cedar Central area of Cleveland. Usually her classes were held at night, and she would ride into school 5 days a week with her friend and another future Oberlin beautician, Anna Pope. After getting her diploma, her first shop opened up in the back of 11 East Vine Street. It's where Puffers was located. It's been since demolished. And her shop was the first Black-owned beauty shop in downtown Oberlin. By 1978, Beulah moved her shop to 52 Lincoln Street and operated Unique Soul Boutique for the rest of her career. Faye and Beulah were leaders in the cosmetology world. They served as officers of the local Chapter 24 of the Ohio Association of Beauticians, along with Anna Pope that you see here. And Anna worked with Beulah for a time. They also served as chairwomen of the association's 62nd annual state convention and educational seminar held in Elyria in 2000. These beauty parlors, these barbershops, including numerous others that are not mentioned in this program, they have left an indelible impression on Oberlin's history. These establishments served as social spaces for African Americans and for African Americans in the period around the Civil War to the Civil Rights. They especially served as safe spaces as well. These shops, where word of mouth helped spread news and information, undoubtedly supported other Black-owned businesses and allowed for a space for people to socialize and converse on issues important to their community. I quickly wanted to throw this image in here. I love this photo. It's one of my favorites. This is Beulah. She attended the 2018 program, offering of this program at Mount Zion Baptist Church. She came to the program and she wore a hat made by none other than Ruth Goodson. Sadly, both Faye and Beulah passed away in 2021 and left a very impactful legacy on Oberlin. Espy and Bessie Carter, we're switching to nursing homes now, they came to Oberlin from Huntsville, Alabama in 1945. In that same year, they started Carter Nursing Home in their own home at 105 East Vine Street. This was the first nursing home in the city of Oberlin and quickly became one of the many successfully operated African American businesses in the area. Before the nursing homes came into wide use, the ailing, the elderly, they would remain in their homes or in the homes of family members. Board and care homes or nursing homes came about after the Great Depression with the purpose of meeting individual needs. Of the 5 main nursing homes in Oberlin from the mid-1900s, 3 of them were Black-owned. The Carters' first nursing home on Vine Street started off small. They just had 2 patients. Within a couple of years, they then moved to 283 North Main Street. That building still stands to accommodate this growing demand for their services. And by 1954, they settled in, constructed 284 East Lorraine Street, which was their final facility. This new location started off with 50 beds, meaning that the couple needed to now train and assemble staff to take care of the patients. Here are some images of residents outside of the home, as well as an interior view. These have been shared by descendants of the Carters, so a big thank you to Anjali and Stephanie. The photos are likely from the 1980s. Espy and Bessie both were alumni of Oakwood College in Alabama. They were active members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In fact, Espy helped build the church here in Oberlin. And they were lifetime members of the NAACP. The couple had 1 child, an adopted daughter named Wanda, who followed in her parents' educational and religious footsteps. Bessie passed away in 1964 at the age of 67. And her daughter became the administrator of the nursing home in 1973. Espy worked at the home up until a brief illness that resulted in his death in 1981. By this time, Carter Nursing Home had expanded to a staff of 34. Wanda operated the family business until 1991, when she sold the 46-year-old family business to an infant organization called the Kendall at Oberlin. Kendall bought the property to acquire the 50 beds, to add to their own future facility, since the state put a cap on the number of allowed in the city. Wanda sold the nursing home due to increasing complexities of operating and funding a nursing home, and it freed her to pursue other long-held personal endeavors. The family property on East Loring is no longer there, and Wanda passed away in July of 2015 at the home of her daughter in Mansfield, Ohio. Bessie and Espy were not only diligent attendants to their residents, to their business, but they were also widely contributing philanthropists. The couple often took on charitable work through their church. They sent supplies to Africa, and throughout their lives, they donated to Oakwood College to financially support its students. Oakwood College built a dormitory for its growing female student body, which was completed in 1966, and it was named in honor of Bessie Carter, who had died just 2 years prior. The residence hall was renovated and rededicated in her honor in 2015, and you can see Wanda in the bottom left corner present at that ceremony. So again, I would like to thank the family members who have preserved these stories so far and have reached out to us to share this information. Admittedly, we are trying to learn more about these next two rest homes. The first one is the Wiggins nursing home. Henry and Gladys Wiggins came to Oberlin in the 1930s, with Henry working as a truck driver for the city street department and Gladys as a maid for a college dormitory. In their first few years, the couple moved quite a bit around town. They first lived at 328 North Main, then they moved to Groveland Street, then they moved to 73 Locust Street. This latter home would eventually be transformed into Wiggins Nursing Home, and the family then moved to 93 Groveland. And that would be their home until 1975. At this time, it is unknown where or when Gladys attended nursing school, but perhaps this photo of her shows her at such a school, or maybe at a hospital with another nurse, the one on the left. According to her family, she also worked for a time at U.S. Steel in Lorraine as a nurse. Gladys was remembered as being very social and fashionable, and you can kind of see that in the picture on the right, while her husband was said to be more reserved. Several family members were remembered as having been employed at the Wiggins Nursing Home. In fact, Gladys and Henry's daughter, Ann Northcutt, who's pictured as a child on the right, in the front yard of the Locust Street home. I think that's when the family was actually living there and before it became a nursing home. She would come to manage the home for a few years after her parents' deaths in 1975. The nursing home went out of business around 79, and eventually the home was torn down, and it's now the parking lot for Mount Zion Baptist Church. I'm very thankful to Telva Hogan and Darian Northcutt, who just very recently reached out to us and shared some of their memories, as well as many of these images. And then the other facility that we're trying to learn more about is Willowly Rest Home. This home began in 1951 by William and Leona McKinney. The McKinneys lived at 353 North Professor Street, and their first home that they operated was just south of them, right next door at 345 North Professor. The family eventually expanded their operations. They opened a second facility on North Main Street. McKinney was very civically engaged. He served on the Oberlin City Council in 1968. William retired from the business in 1987 after 36 years of running the nursing home. By this time, the nursing home catered to 70 residents and employed 55 nurses. He transferred the business to Francis C. Filko, who had previously been the assistant administrator for about a dozen years. Filko, though, he only ran the home for a few years. In 1990, 20 beds were purchased by Welcome Nursing Home to expand their facility to a capacity of 100 beds. And I'm not quite sure, I mean, it's not literally selling beds, but it's capacity. But since this is also around the time that Carter's sold to Kendall, I'm kind of suspecting that maybe they sold their remaining beds to Kendall as well. We'll end the program with Pedford's Bakery. which was a long-standing and beloved business. The bakery was started by Clarence Pettiford in 1923. From the 40s until 1969, Clarence and his son Wallace ran the business together. After Clarence passed away, Wallace continued the bakery at its location at 18 South Main Street, approximately where the subway is now, until 1988. OHC staff have long heard the stories of how wonderful Mr. Pettiford's various treats tasted. We've heard that some preferred their donuts, others his brownies, his cakes, his bread. I just had a post last week and my mouth was watering the entire time. And I didn't even get to taste it. And the ads from the 1950s and 60s also kind of touted all of these things. A lot of people spoke of het bread, making special trips to Pettiford's for round loaves of the lightly colored and textured bread that many had declared the best in Oberlin. Both Pettiford's and Gibson's were operating at the same time, with former workers remembering how each would help the other out when stock was short or they needed some supplies. As beloved and successful as an establishment that Pettiford's was, both Clarence and Wallace still faced discriminatory practices, which made running the business more difficult. For example, they were never able to outright buy the building. They could have, they were successful. They weren't even able to obtain a long-term lease of it, even though it had been a generational business. So one thing that has come out of this research, again, is a desire to know more. Throughout newspapers, oral histories, mentionings, we're compiling lists of individuals that we hope to learn more about. These are some names broken down by eras. So, here's all of our 19th century people. Again, these are not comprehensive lists. So if you have individuals or stories that we should be aware of, I recommend we have some forms up here that you can fill out to at least give us names of people or places that we can research later. These are, we talk about a lot of these, but we'd be here all week if we wanted to really kind of talk about all these individuals and their impact. 1950 to 2000s. I'm hoping this is an era that's kind of difficult for us with our current resources at the Heritage Center. So, hopefully this is recent enough memory for some people that we can start getting these stories while they're still in living memory. And then, of course, our present day business owners. We should be supporting our business owners, our local business owners. So, a common thread throughout these stories is that many of Oberlin's business owners operated and they worked in not just one type of business, but they worked in several. Some worked with similar occupations, such as Wilson Bruce Evans. He adapted his cabinet-making business to include other forms of carpentry-related work. Then there are others like the Goodsons, who juggled many different endeavors at once. Some tried their hand at several different businesses throughout their lives, never settling, but always evolving. This suggests how flexible one had to be successful, to make ends meet, especially during rapid changes in product demands, economics, evolving technologies, and dealing the entire time with systemic racism. This adaptability is the epitome of the entrepreneurial spirit, and I hope these stories have inspired you today. This, again, is ongoing research, and I would like to thank some individuals who have contributed heavily to this. Again, it makes this evolving program possible. So at this time, we invite questions, comments, stories that you would like to share, and if you're not comfortable doing that at this time, please also feel free to reach out if you would like to talk with us more, if you want to set up your own research appointment to kind of cruise our archives and see what we have and fill in maybe some voids of your own family histories. We'd love to set that up with you. And I'd also like to, again, thank our current business owners for all that they do in our community, including, again, the ARB at Tappan Square for providing food for this evening. So thank you. We can also do questions, too. Sorry.
I just wanted to share, we had a special request. Those of you who raised your hands earlier as business owners, if you would like to introduce yourself and your business, that was a request from somebody in the audience. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, please raise your hand and we'll go through people. In the back, yes.
Audrey Cole, I run a B&B at my house on Letter Road.
Runs it at B&B, Audrey Cole, thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to be repeating things for volume. Yeah.
Sharon Pearson, my husband and I have a travel agency, Escher's Travel Agency, and we also have a Airbnb over in Geneva, Ohio, called Manahan.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to share? Yes.
I'm Carla Lott, and I sell photography and cars, and I do graphic design stuff.
Carla Locke, photography, graphic design. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, sorry to step in there, but I think there's a question.
Amanda, can you please put up that slide about the current businesses so that we can
Fill in the gaps.
we can patronize them?
Oh, yes.
This went by so quickly. Thank you.
And I will say some of these businesses are not.
Before this.
Oh, sorry.
It's current, it started with Charles Horton.
Yep.
Top of that list.
I'll go to that one. I will just a caveat that some of these businesses are not in businesses kind of like from 2000 to present day, but there are a number of them that are still around. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I have a question about the millinery business. Was that automatically for women only? In an era when men wore hats as much as women did?
I think you're,
Repeat the question.
so the question was millinery kind of more female designated? Is that kind of your question, or was it, could men get into the mix as well?
Well, specifically the person that you highlighted,
Yeah.
one woman, did she make men's hats equally as she made women's hats?
I think she specialized in women's hats. You certainly did have male hat makers too. And you do see that even to today, that you have men's hat shops.
What used to be known as haberdashers?
Haberdashery, yeah. Absolutely. So, yes, I think she mostly focused on that. Yeah.
I lived next door to a store that opened up in a house for about 8 years on South Pleasant Street. And I know there was a store on Golden Street that opened up in a house, as well as I remember a little stand on the corner of where Martin Luther King Art is, a big stand that was there for a number of years. And I just wondered if you had done anything about those stores, especially on the southeastern side.
I'm sure we might have, again, we have like inventory sheets. Right now, I'm not. I can't quite figure out who those might belong to. Did you sign in? I'll come and chat with you and we'll figure out. I'll look into it and get back to you on that. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think there is plenty more food. If you'd like to see some of the items from our collection, I'd be delighted to walk you through some of the things, but thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it.